In the grim darkness of the far future, the galaxy does not forgive. Wars are not fought for glory, but for survival, and even victory is soaked in blood. The Imperium of Man, vast and mighty, has faced enemies that would make entire civilizations crumble, battles that shattered brotherhood, and betrayals that turned heroes into monsters. Some of these wars were so catastrophic that the Imperium barely survived, and the truth of their horrors has been buried in shadow, erased from history to protect the minds of the living. Today, we will journey through 5 such wars, each a nightmare of strategy, courage, and unimaginable destruction. Each battle left scars that still echo across the stars, shaping humanity's fate in ways no one dared to remember. The first war will reveal betrayal so deep that brothers became executioners, tearing entire legions apart in the flames of rebellion. The second war will take us to the edge of reality itself, where cosmic powers clashed and entire star systems were annihilated before the eyes of the Old Ones. Next, the Siege of Terror will immerse us in a battle where the cradle of humanity burned, demons walked among the defenders, and the Emperor himself faced his greatest nightmare. Then, the Rangdan genocides will uncover a secret conflict so devastating and mysterious that even surviving legions were nearly erased from existence. Finally, the Badab War will expose the dark truth that even humanity's greatest warriors can become its deadliest enemies, as brother fought brother in a war that tested loyalty, honor, and survival. These are not tales of triumph. They are stories of fire, blood, and relentless horror, each one a testament to the fragility of civilization and the unyielding price of survival. Stay vigilant, for the Imperium's darkest secrets are about to unfold, and the wars you are about to witness will challenge everything you thought you knew about courage, loyalty, and fear. The Imperium once stood as a shining beacon of humanity's power, its reach stretching across countless worlds, guided by the Emperor's unyielding vision. In those days, mankind believed it was unbreakable, a civilization forged in light and order, commanded by beings of incomparable strength and devotion. Among them were the Primarchs, warriors of legend whose presence could shape the destiny of stars, and their Space Marine legions, the ultimate guardians of mankind. Together, they formed an army capable of holding back the universe itself, standing as eternal bulwarks against the darkness beyond the stars. But even the brightest light cast the deepest shadows, and in the heart of the Imperium, corruption had begun to fester, hidden from the eyes of the faithful, unseen by those who trusted the Emperor above all. Horus, the most beloved of the Primarchs, the war master, the embodiment of loyalty and martial genius, became the first to fall. It was subtle at first, whispers of doubt, temptations disguised as counsel from those who had long waited for the Imperium to falter. Chaos, patient and cunning, found its way into his mind, exploiting every fear, every ambition, and every wounded pride. Slowly, the foundations of brotherhood began to crack. Legions that had once fought as a single, indomitable force began to fracture, their commanders unsure of allegiance, their purpose tainted by uncertainty. In secret, pacts were made, loyalties twisted, and an entire galaxy unknowingly moved toward the precipice of betrayal. What began as a seed of doubt became a wildfire of treachery, and the most feared army in human history was poised to turn against its creators. When the betrayal finally revealed itself, it was not subtle. Worlds burned, entire populations extinguished in the name of ambition and revenge. Loyal Space Marines found themselves facing brothers they had once trained, fought, and bled alongside. Battles erupted across systems that had never seen such horror. Cities once symbols of imperial glory were reduced to smoldering ruins, their defenders overwhelmed by legions of traitors armed with the very weapons forged to protect mankind. The skies of countless planets were darkened with fire, and the screams of innocence echoed across the void. Every act of heroism was met with a greater act of treachery. Every victory was overshadowed by a loss so profound it could never be recovered. The Imperium was no longer united. It was a landscape of horror, and even its most brilliant warriors struggled to comprehend the scale of the calamity. The Siege of Terra, though often remembered as a climactic event of the heresy, was only one chapter in a galaxy-wide war of devastation. Systems fell in weeks that should have taken centuries to conquer, and the loyalty of men became as fragile as the stone walls they defended. Loyalist legions fought desperately, but for every strike they delivered, the traitors had anticipated, countered, and outmaneuvered them. Demons walked openly alongside Horus forces, their forms of blasphemy of nature and reality, tearing through defenders with terrifying ease. Even the most seasoned warriors, trained in the art war since adolescence, felt the paralyzing weight of despair as they faced enemies who knew their every tactic before it was executed. The Imperium's defenses, once thought impregnable, began to crumble under the unrelenting assault, and every victory gained came at a staggering cost in blood, hope, and faith. The personal tragedies of the Primarchs themselves illustrated the depth of the heresy's horror. Some, like Rogel, Dorn, and Sanguinius, bore the weight of entire legions upon their shoulders, fighting battles where failure meant the annihilation of thousands. Others, like Leman Russ and Jagatai Khan, were forced to chase traitors across systems, knowing that no matter how fast they moved, the corruption was spreading faster than any fleet could intercept. Each confrontation was a test of strategy, strength, and will, yet every triumph was temporary, every advance countered by betrayal, sabotage, or the subtle corruption of chaos. The galaxy became a chessboard of fire and blood, with pawns, knights, and kings alike sacrificed in the name of ambition, revenge, or survival. The heresy proved that even those who were thought to be invincible were vulnerable to manipulation, doubt, and the inexorable pull of darkness. Beyond the battlefield, the consequences of the heresy seeped into every corner of human civilization. Civil unrest, famine, and despair accompanied the widespread warfare, as millions of civilians were caught in the crossfire or deliberately sacrificed to weaken resistance. The Adeptus Administratum struggled to maintain order, but their bureaucratic machinery could not match the scale of the chaos unleashed. Worlds fell into anarchy, and the faith of entire populations was shattered when they saw the protectors of mankind committing atrocities in the name of power. Temples, bastions, and fortresses, once symbols of hope, became tombs, bearing witness to the horrors perpetrated in the name of loyalty and ambition. Humanity realized that survival in such times did not guarantee safety, only prolonged exposure to suffering, fear, and despair. In secret, whispers of chaos corruption spread to the ranks of the Imperium. Legions thought loyal were discovered to be compromised, and orders given by trusted leaders were subverted to serve the traitors' ends. The subtle infiltration of chaos extended beyond battlefields and into the minds of those who should have been the stalwart defenders of humanity. Leaders were assassinated, plans intercepted, and morale shattered, often before a fight even began. Battles were won on paper, only to be lost on the ground in the most gruesome and unexpected ways. The heresy taught the Imperium that knowledge alone was no defense against betrayal, and that even the most meticulously planned campaigns could unravel in the blink of an eye when the enemy had turned from within. The Emperor himself, who had guided humanity through the Great Crusade with unmatched wisdom and authority, faced the ultimate betrayal. His favored son, Horus, now a servant of chaos, challenged everything the Imperium stood for. When the Emperor confronted him aboard Horus' flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, it was a battle not just of strength, but of ideology and fate. The duel was cataclysmic, a clash of gods in mortal form, each strike reshaping the vessel and scarring the minds of those who bore witness. The death of Horus, at the hands of the Emperor, brought an end to the immediate threat, but left the Imperium forever altered. The Emperor himself was mortally wounded, entombed on the Golden Throne, a living corpse kept alive by arcane technology and the prayers of billions, unable to guide his empire but still necessary for its survival. In the aftermath of the heresy, the Imperium was a shadow of its former glory. Entire legions were purged, the survivors broken in body and spirit. Worlds lay in ruin, their populations decimated, and the doctrines of the Adeptus Astartes were rewritten to prevent future rebellions. The memory of the war was carefully curated, sanitized, and mythologized to hide the full extent of the horror. Only fragments of truth remained in forbidden texts, whispered in secret by those who had survived the unimaginable. The galaxy learned a hard lesson. Survival was possible, but it came at the cost of knowledge, freedom, and innocence. The heresy had proven that the Imperium could endure anything, but it would never be whole again. Even generations later, the echoes of the Horus heresy reverberate across the stars. Battles fought today, in the name of loyalty and order, are shadowed by strategies, weapons, and fears first born in that war. Primarchs are remembered as legends, but their fall and triumph remain a warning that no power is absolute. Every Space Marine carries a memory of betrayal in their gene seed. Every commander understands that obedience is fragile, and every citizen learns through ritual and catechism that doubt can be deadly. The heresy became more than history. It became the foundation of the Imperium's obsession with control, secrecy, and survival at any cost. Its horror is eternal, and the Imperium's endurance is measured not in glory, but in the scars it bears and the nightmares it keeps hidden. Long before humanity rose to the stars, the galaxy was a place of gods and monsters, where civilizations were built on power beyond comprehension and destruction was measured in millennia. The war in heaven was not merely a conflict of armies. It was a battle that reshaped reality itself, a war fought by beings who wielded the universe as their weapon. Entire star systems became arenas of annihilation, and species were raised and destroyed at the whim of powers that cared nothing for morality or mercy. The Old Ones, architects of life and order, faced enemies whose ambitions rivaled the cosmos, and every engagement unleashed devastation so profound that it still echoes across the stars. In this war, no victory was final, no defeat absolute, and no soul could survive untouched by its magnitude. The Necronder, a species born under the harshest of suns, suffered under short lives, disease, and despair, their civilization teetering on the edge of extinction. Their hatred of mortality made them susceptible to the promises of immortality offered by entities beyond their comprehension. They traded their fragile flesh for bodies of living metal, becoming the first Necrons, warriors of eternal death. The transition was brutal. Entire populations were transformed, consciousness trapped in soulless machines, emotions stripped away, and identities erased. Those who survived the transformation became instruments of genocide, soldiers who would wage the war in heaven with a cold, unfeeling precision that mortals could scarcely comprehend. The galaxy, which had once been full of life, now trembled at the arrival of a mechanical legion that knew only duty and destruction. The Old Ones, creators of countless species, wielded psychic powers capable of shaping entire worlds. They fought to protect the balance of life, but their understanding of war was still bound by logic, morality, and restraint. Against the Necrons and their dark patrons, these limitations became vulnerabilities. Battles were fought on scales unimaginable, with entire planetary systems altered as weapons tore through matter, energy, and even the fabric of reality. Stars were extinguished, planets shattered, and the warp itself became a battlefield. When the Old Ones struck, they struck with precision and intelligence, yet even their power could not prevent the Necrons from advancing, driven by their inexorable logic and immortal persistence. Every victory was costly, every maneuver shadowed by the knowledge that the enemy's patience spanned eons. The war introduced horrors that would define the galaxy for all future millennia. Ancient weapons capable of unmaking planets were unleashed, and the Necrons discovered the secrets of the Old One's psychic constructs, twisting them into instruments of annihilation. Entire civilizations were eradicated before their architects could even comprehend the threat. Creatures designed to embody hope and order became conduits of terror, as the energy of stars was drained and reality itself bent to the will of the combatants. The warp, which had been a subtle undercurrent of power, became a battlefield where beings of unimaginable horror could manifest, sowing terror in ways that mortal minds could not survive. The war in heaven was not just a war of armies. It was a war of existence itself, a battle in which survival was fleeting and every step carried the weight of annihilation. Among the greatest horrors was the realization that the war in heaven was not bound by loyalty or morality. Allies betrayed one another, not for ambition, but for survival or necessity. The old ones experimented in secret, creating species to act as soldiers, weapons, and spies, knowing that many would perish as collateral. The Necrons executed plans of cold perfection, eliminating anyone who could threaten their advancement. Battles were decided before they began, strategies deployed across light years and centuries, and countless lives were extinguished without ever seeing the battlefield. What emerged was not simply victory or defeat, but a sense of universal dread, a lesson that the galaxy itself was a tool for those willing to embrace horror as a weapon. The emergence of the Tan, star gods of incomprehensible power, escalated the conflict to levels previously unimagined. These beings consumed stars, fed on entire species, and manipulated the Necrons as instruments of death. Planets were hollowed, ecosystems destroyed, and the light of life extinguished across entire sectors. The Tan's influence twisted reality, creating nightmarish landscapes where time and space no longer followed natural rules. The Old Ones, despite their wisdom and power, struggled to counteract these entities, whose motives were alien in their incomprehensibility. Every engagement left scars that lasted for millennia, shaping the physical and psychic structure of the galaxy, and laying the foundation for conflicts yet to come. As the war raged on, the Necrons perfected their strategies, learning from every defeat and victory, while the Old Ones' creations evolved in response to threat. Entire species became warriors, survivalists, and victims simultaneously, caught in a cycle of experimentation, combat, and extinction. Planets became crucibles of violence, their atmospheres scorched, their ecosystems shattered, and their inhabitants enslaved or obliterated. Psychic storms raged unchecked, tearing at reality and leaving behind only desolation. Civilizations arose only to fall immediately under the weight of mechanized inevitability. The scale of suffering was incomprehensible, and even the gods of the Old Ones could not prevent the tide of destruction from advancing. The final stages of the war in heaven left the galaxy profoundly altered. The Necrons, though victorious, became hidden, sleeping in tomb worlds for eons, their knowledge and weapons waiting for a time when they would awaken to claim the universe. The Old Ones were reduced to whispers, their power diminished, and their creations left to struggle against the void. The very fabric of reality had been scarred, and the warp carried the echoes of battles fought by beings whose lifespan spanned millennia. Stars remained hollowed, planets poisoned, and the seeds of future conflict were sown in the ashes of this primordial struggle. The galaxy would never forget, nor could it ever heal, from the horrors that had been unleashed. Even today, remnants of the war in heaven haunt the Imperium and the galaxy beyond. Tomb World harbors sleeping Necrons, waiting to rise again. Artifact of unimaginable power, forged in that war, lie hidden, their knowledge suppressed by fear. Psychic echoes ripple through the warp, manifesting as nightmares, hauntings, and demon incursions that echo the ancient horrors. Humanity, despite its dominance, exists only because of careful timing, secrecy, and luck, having inherited a galaxy already marred by the consequences of a war it never fully understood. The war in heaven was not simply a memory. It was a foundation of a universe shaped by terror, where survival demanded constant vigilance, ruthlessness, and the understanding that even the strongest civilizations could be extinguished without warning. The war in heaven demonstrated that the universe is indifferent to morality, that survival is dictated not by strength alone, but by patience, foresight, and the willingness to embrace horror as a weapon. The lessons of the war are encoded into every corner of the galaxy. In the fear of unknown threats, in the obsessive caution of the Imperium, and in the knowledge that some horrors are too great to ever be confronted directly. The Old Ones may have created life, and the Necrons may have sought immortality, but the galaxy itself became the ultimate battlefield, and every civilization since has inherited a universe where survival is a constant war, and where the echoes of that ancient conflict shape every decision, every strategy, and every moment of terror yet to come. The Siege of Terra was a culmination of betrayal that had been brewing for decades, the moment when the galaxy's brightest hope became its darkest nightmare. For 10,000 years, the Emperor had led the Imperium to conquest and unity, spreading humanity's dominion across the stars with the might of his sons and the devotion of countless legions. Yet the very tools of his triumph had been turned against him, and the War Master, Horus, now a servant of chaos, brought the full fury of traitor forces to the heart of the Imperium. Terra, the cradle of humanity, the throne world of the Emperor, became a fortress besieged by those who had once sworn eternal loyalty. The planet itself trembled as fleets darkened the skies, weapons of unimaginable power tearing through orbiting defenses, and the cries of billions filled the void, a chorus of despair that would echo across history. Every citizen, soldier, and warrior felt the shadow of death approaching, knowing that this war would decide the fate of humanity itself. Horus' forces did not arrive as conventional armies. They were an amalgamation of corrupted primarchs, possessed legions, and demons of the warp, each entity a nightmare given form. Cities and bastions were destroyed before defenders could react, entire orbital stations shattered in moments, and the loyalist defenders faced enemies who knew their tactics intimately. For every counterattack launched by the Emperor's forces, Horus had a response already in motion, a trap laid across worlds, space, and minds. The sky itself became a battlefield, streaked with fire, ash, and the wreckage of ships so massive they could eclipse continents below. Each engagement was a theater of chaos and terror, designed not merely to conquer, but to break the spirit of the defenders. Loyalty and courage were tested against a machine of destruction perfected over millennia, and the weight of despair pressed upon all who stood against it. On the surface, the fighting was no less catastrophic. Fortresses once deemed impregnable crumbled beneath siege engines powered by warp energy, while loyalist legions fought with unmatched ferocity, aware that retreat or surrender was not an option. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, their cities razed, and their faith shaken as they witnessed the gods themselves walking among the traitors. Demons leapt across battlefields, tearing men from the walls of strongholds and consuming those who tried to resist. Firestorms swept across plains and metropolises, consuming everything in their path. The very air seemed poisoned with despair, and even the strongest warriors, those who had survived countless campaigns, felt the paralyzing weight of hopelessness pressing down upon them. Each day of the siege blurred into the next, a relentless procession of death, ruin, and suffering that allowed no respite for the defenders. The Emperor himself, though beyond mortal limits, became the linchpin of the planet's defense. Every strategy, every deployment of forces, was orchestrated with precision that defied comprehension. He moved like a god among men, his presence alone inspiring unparalleled courage and resistance. Yet even he was forced to confront the enormity of Horus' betrayal, the knowledge that a son, once loved and trusted above all others, had become the instrument of universal devastation. Battles were waged on multiple fronts, and while victories were won, they were always tempered by the immense losses incurred to achieve them. Entire legions were decimated, key fortresses fell, and the death toll of civilians rose by the millions. The Emperor's might, awe-inspiring as it was, could only delay the inevitable, never fully prevent it, and even his strategic genius could not erase the scars left on Terra's surface and the souls of its defenders. Amid the chaos, individual acts of heroism shone briefly, as commanders and warriors sacrificed everything to hold back the tide. Primarchs loyal to the Emperor, such as Sanguinius, led their forces with courage that inspired both awe and sorrow. They faced traitors who were once brothers, legions whose strength mirrored their own, and yet they continued to fight, knowing that failure meant more than death. It meant the annihilation of Terra itself. Every battle was a test of not only martial prowess, but also endurance and willpower. The skies and cities became a crucible, burning away doubt and fear, while forging warriors who bore the weight of humanity's survival on shoulders that already carried unimaginable burdens. The toll on mind, body, and spirit was immeasurable, and those who survived the day's fighting were forced to confront horrors that would haunt them for the rest of their existence. The war played its most sinister role in the siege, as Horus' forces called forth demons, spirits of pure malice and corruption, to strike terror into the defenders. Entire divisions of loyalist forces were annihilated before even reaching the front line, consumed or possessed by entities that existed beyond natural law. Psychic storms raged across the planet, tearing reality itself, leaving cities as shattered skeletons of what once stood. The defenders, though unyielding, were constantly aware that their enemy could bend the very rules of existence to their will. Every movement of the traitor legions was accompanied by a supernatural presence, a terror that made even the most hardened warrior hesitate. The siege of Terra was no longer a battle fought by armies alone. It was a war where reality itself was a weapon, and humanity was both shield and target. The final confrontation between Horus and the Emperor unfolded aboard the Vengeful Spirit, a battle that would determine the fate of Terra and the Imperium. It was a duel not only of strength but of ideology, wills, and a culmination of betrayal that had festered for decades. The ship itself became a crucible of fire, blood, and psychic energy, each strike of Horus matched by the Emperor with a power that could level mountains. The air burned with the force of their combat, and the screams of those still fighting below rose to meet the battle above. The clash was cataclysmic, a theater of horror, where the very concept of mortality was tested, and the stakes extended beyond personal survival to the survival of all humanity. When Horus finally fell, slain by the hand of the Emperor, the galaxy exhaled, but the cost was immeasurable. Even in victory, the Imperium emerged broken and hollow. The Emperor was mortally wounded, forced into the Golden Throne, a living corpse sustained by arcane technology and the prayers of billions, no longer able to guide humanity directly. The surviving legions were scattered, their numbers decimated, their faith in one another shattered by the betrayal of brothers. Entire worlds lay in ruins, and the lessons of the siege were burned into the psyche of humanity. Loyalty is fragile. Survival requires sacrifice, and even the most sacred of bonds can be twisted into instruments of destruction. Terror itself bore the scars, a constant reminder that even the heart of humanity is vulnerable, and that vigilance is the only shield against annihilation. The siege of Terra reshaped the Imperium forever, establishing doctrines of paranoia, censorship, and absolute control. Every subsequent campaign, every decision, and every law reflects the lessons learned during those harrowing days. Civilizations were rebuilt with focus on obedience, militarization, and fear of repetition. Heroes of the siege became legends, their stories sanctified, sanitized, or distorted to inspire unwavering loyalty. Yet the memory of the horrors endured persisted beneath the surface, a grim warning that the Imperium survives not because it is righteous, but because it is willing to embrace any cost, any atrocity, and any shadow that guarantees survival. The siege of Terra became not a victory, but a testament to humanity's capacity for endurance in the face of total collapse. The echo of the siege continues to haunt the Imperium, its legacy visible in every bastion of defense, every regiment of space marines, and every act of bureaucratic control. The lessons learned in fire and blood have been etched into the very structure of governance and warfare, guiding decisions across millennia. Terra stands today as a symbol of endurance, but also as a warning. Survival is not measured by victory alone, but by the willingness to bear scars, to sacrifice hope, and confront horrors that cannot be overcome. The Siege of Terra demonstrated that even in the face of betrayal, chaos, and overwhelming force, humanity endures, though at a cost so great it can never be truly calculated or understood by those who come after. The Rangdan genocides remain one of the most shrouded conflicts in the history of the Imperium, a war so catastrophic that the very memory of it was deemed too dangerous to preserve. Entire sectors were devastated, legions nearly annihilated, and the galaxy was forced to confront an enemy whose existence challenged the limits of comprehension. Unlike wars of rebellion or betrayal, this conflict was waged against an alien species whose strategies were predicated on the destruction of everything that opposed them. The Rangdan were not merely opponents. They were a force of nature, a calculated, remorseless intelligence that moved through space with precision and lethal intent. From the first encounters, it became clear that this war would not follow the conventional patterns of battle known to the Imperium. Each engagement was a test of endurance, strategy, and survival, and failure often meant extinction, not merely defeat. The initial contact with the Rangdan brought confusion and terror to the Imperium's leaders. Worlds vanished without warning. Fleets disappeared into the void, and reports from scouts were inconsistent, often contradictory, leaving commanders uncertain of both enemy capabilities and intentions. The enemy did not conform to the tactics of human or Xenos warfare. They were unpredictable, fast, and adaptive, using the environment, the weather of planets, and the vulnerabilities of even the most formidable fleets to their advantage. Space Marines, the epitome of martial discipline and strength, were challenged on every front. Ambushes decimated battalions. Trap after trap shattered even the most careful plans, and every encounter reinforced the terrifying reality. This was not a foe to be negotiated with or underestimated. The Rangdan operated on a scale the human comprehension struggled to grasp, their intelligence rivaling entire legions in its efficiency and cruelty. The Imperium responded with overwhelming force, deploying entire chapters of Space Marines alongside planetary defense fleets, seeking to contain the threat before it could spread. Yet every counterattack revealed new horrors. The Rangdan were capable of manipulating space itself, creating void anomalies that destroyed ships without warning. Their planetary forces could infiltrate entire cities in hours, leaving devastation in their wake. Strategic strongholds were rendered useless as the alien forces adapted with frightening speed, exploiting weaknesses that no human strategist had anticipated. Every battle was a high-stakes game in which the Imperium learned quickly that brute force alone would not suffice. Victory was possible only through careful planning, relentless courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything. The cost of engagement was staggering. Entire Space Marine chapters were brought to the brink of annihilation, their numbers reduced to a fraction of what they had been, their genetic legacies fractured by losses that could never be replaced. Worlds were depopulated, and civilian casualties numbered in the billions. Administrators and governors struggled to maintain order. Yet even the most well-defended planets succumbed to panic and chaos as the Rangdan advanced. Supplies dwindled, communications failed, and morale plummeted as the Imperium realized the sheer scale of the threat. Unlike other wars, where time could be used to recover, rebuild, and strategize, the Rangdan demanded immediate response, punishing hesitation with slaughter. The galaxy had never before faced a war that moved with such ruthless precision and total disregard for the value of life. The psychological impact on the defenders was profound. Space Marines trained for centuries, equipped with the finest weapons and guided by the most brilliant strategists, found themselves facing an enemy that made every tactic, every contingency, and every lesson irrelevant. Fear became a constant companion. Yet it was a disciplined fear, one that sharpened instincts even as it gnawed at resolve. Commanders were forced to make impossible choices, abandon planets to save fleets, sacrifice thousands to protect strategic positions, and trust in plans that might fail despite their brilliance. Each decision carried consequences that extended far beyond the battlefield, and even minor errors could ripple outward into catastrophic results. The Rangdan were not merely an opponent. They were a crucible, testing every aspect of the Imperium's strength, adaptability, and endurance. The war was fought on multiple fronts simultaneously, from the icy voids of distant systems to the volcanic plains of contested planets. Each theater presented unique dangers, gravitational anomalies that swallowed entire battle groups, psychic phenomena that shattered minds, and biological agents that turned loyal populations against themselves. The Imperium's response had to be equally diverse, combining ground warfare, orbital assaults, and covert operations designed to destabilize the enemy without provoking overwhelming retaliation. Specialized task forces were created, deploying experimental weapons and forbidden technologies to counter the Rangdan threat. Yet even these measures often came at a cost. As untested devices could malfunction, civilians could be harmed, and victories were always measured in blood. The war demanded ingenuity, courage, and unyielding resolve from every human who faced it. As the conflict reached its height, the Imperium began to recognize the full scope of the Rangdan threat. Entire regions of space were declared lost, sacrificed to protect more critical sectors, and the secrecy surrounding the conflict grew. Records were destroyed, reports were sanitized, and the truth of the war was hidden from all but the highest echelons of command. The Rangdan themselves seemed to anticipate this, exploiting the Imperium's need for secrecy, creating diversions and threats that forced loyalists to expend resources and lives in futile countermeasures. The Imperium learned that survival depended not only on defeating the enemy, but also on containing knowledge of the war itself, preserving the morale and faith of the wider galaxy. The Rangdan became a shadow that stretched across systems, unseen but always lethal, a nightmare that could not be confronted openly without risking complete collapse. The ingenuity and resilience of human forces were pushed to extremes. Space Marines adapted their tactics, combining stealth, precision strikes, and unconventional maneuvers to counter the alien intelligence. Entire fleets were restructured, planetary defenses re-engineered, and logistical systems overhauled to support continuous operations under impossible conditions. Yet for every advance, the Rangdan had already prepared countermeasures, forcing the Imperium into a cycle of attrition and improvisation that left no margin for error. The war became a test of endurance as much as strength, demanding that leaders and warriors alike endure unrelenting pressure, constant fear, and the knowledge that failure meant extinction on an unimaginable scale. Despite the horrors, the Imperium eventually stabilized its frontiers, managing to contain the Rangdan threat through a combination of sacrifice, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. Entire legions have been nearly destroyed, and planets remain scarred by the devastation. But the galaxy survived. The true cost of victory was hidden from public record, erased from the annals of history, to prevent panic and maintain faith. The Rangdan themselves vanished into the void, leaving only the scars of their presence and a lingering fear that they would one day return. Survivors carried the memories of unspeakable horrors, their minds and bodies marked by the cruelty of a war that humanity barely endured, a lesson in both resilience and the terrible price of survival. The Rangdan genocides left an indelible mark on the Imperium. Military doctrines were rewritten to account for alien intelligence beyond comprehension, and secrecy became paramount in all dealings with potential threats. Every encounter reinforced the understanding that humanity was not supreme, that the galaxy contained forces beyond its ability to control, and that survival required constant vigilance, innovation, and the willingness to accept extreme sacrifice. The ghost of the Rangdan War haunted every fleet, every fortress, and every mind trained for combat. A reminder that even the mightiest civilizations could face extinction at the hands of an enemy that defied understanding. For those who fought, the war was a nightmare that could not be forgotten, a shadow that shaped the Imperium for all time. Even today, the lessons of the Rangdan genocides influence the Imperium strategies and policies. Tomb worlds, defensive doctrines, and secret strike forces all bear the imprint of experiences gained during the conflict. The galaxy may have survived, but it did so forever altered, its understanding of war, strategy, and alien intelligence forever shaped by the horrors faced in those lost sectors. The Rangdan remain a silent specter, a warning that the universe is indifferent, that threats can arise from beyond comprehension, and that the Imperium's endurance is not a guarantee of peace, but a measure of its ability to survive horrors no other species could endure. In confronting the Rangdan, humanity glimpsed the vastness of the universe's cruelty and discovered that survival alone was an achievement worthy of reverence, fear, and eternal vigilance. The Badab War stands as a chilling testament to the dangers that lurk within the Imperium itself, a conflict born not of alien invaders or cosmic betrayal, but from the ambition, pride, and ambition of humanity's finest warriors. The Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, who were created to be the ultimate defenders of mankind, became both executioners and victims in this grim civil war. What began as dissent and discontent among chapters escalated into a brutal conflict that pitted brother against brother, tearing at the very fabric of loyalty that bound the Emperor's sons. The galaxy watched helpless, as legions that had once fought together as one force of godlike power were consumed by suspicion, ambition, and the lust for dominance. The seeds of rebellion, carefully planted by political tension and pride, grew unchecked, and soon the Imperium faced a war whose ferocity was matched only by its moral ambiguity. The origins of the conflict lay in the pride of the Astral Claws, a space marine chapter stationed at the fringes of imperial space. Years of autonomy, combined with culture steeped in militaristic pride and regional authority, fostered resentment against the Central Imperium. When the Adeptus Custos demanded accountability and the reassignment of resources, Huron Blackheart, the chapter master, resisted with the fervor of a warrior who believed he was defending honor, tradition, and the lives of his men. Other chapters, influenced by his charisma and authority, began to question the will of the emperor and the legitimacy of imperial edicts. Slowly, what began as political tension escalated into open hostility. Entire systems became theaters of preparation. Secret stockpiles were amassed, and the Imperium braced itself for a war that would pit the finest warriors of humanity against one another. When the first battles erupted, the scale of violence was staggering. Space Marines bred and trained for loyalty now faced their brethren with bolter and blade. Strike cruisers tore through the void, lashing out with firepower that could annihilate cities in a heartbeat. Fortresses, once symbols of defense and protection, became battlefields soaked in blood as loyalists and rebel forces clashed across planets, orbital platforms, and asteroid belts. Tactical genius, strategic planning, and centuries of training were put to the ultimate test, yet the emotional toll was unparalleled. Warriors who had once fought side by side now tore each other apart with ruthless precision, and every victory came at the cost of millions of lives, both military and civilian. The very notion of brotherhood became meaningless as survival, honor, and vengeance drove every action. The Badab War was characterized not only by ferocious combat, but also by a profound moral ambiguity. The rebels, though in defiance of imperial law, often fought to defend territories, populations, and ideals they believed were just. Loyalist forces, tasked with enforcing obedience, committed atrocities of their own in the name of restoring order. Civilians became collateral damage, caught in the relentless crossfire of bolter fire, plasma blasts, and orbital bombardments. Entire cities were razed in strategic strikes. Infrastructure destroyed to deny the enemy resources, and populations displaced or massacred to prevent resistance. Each engagement tested the limits of morality, as commanders weighed the cost of victory against the price of humanity, often discovering that survival demanded acts they could scarcely bear to contemplate. The individual battles of the war were as legendary as they were horrifying. Huron Blackheart, leading the Astral Claws, proved a tactical genius, outmaneuvering loyalist forces repeatedly and striking where the Imperium least expected. Yet every advance was marked by tragedy, as loyalist chapters responded with equal cunning, employing devastating weaponry and sacrificial tactics to regain lost ground. Ambushes, betrayals, and covert operations became commonplace, as both sides sought to gain advantage in a war where conventional rules of engagement had dissolved. The skill and valor of the Space Marines were unmatched, but so too was the psychological toll, as every engagement required facing former allies, friends, and mentors now transformed into enemies, forcing warriors to reconcile loyalty, duty, and survival with each devastating action. The war also demonstrated the fragility of the Imperium's political structure. Administrators, governors, and planetary leaders were powerless to intervene, often forced to watch as systems descended into chaos under the influence of warring Space Marine chapters. Supply lines were cut, communication networks disrupted, and entire sectors of space became isolated, leaving populations vulnerable and soldiers overextended. The Imperium's bureaucratic machinery, designed to govern and control vast populations, proved insufficient in the face of a civil war that combined speed, intelligence, and overwhelming force. Commanders on both sides adapted with ruthless efficiency, employing strategies that took centuries to master and leaving entire populations and regions as collateral in the pursuit of strategic advantage. The war revealed the limits of human control and the terrifying consequences when the most powerful tools of the Imperium turned inward. The scale of destruction was unparalleled for a conflict fought solely among human forces. Fortress monasteries that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Planets, long thriving under protection of Space Marines, were rendered uninhabitable through sustained bombardment. The skies were blackened with smoke, and the cries of civilians echoed across worlds, a grim soundtrack to battles that would decide not only the fate of the rebels, but the moral integrity of the Imperium itself. Even the survivors of each engagement carried the scars of what they had witnessed. Broken comrades, shattered cities, and a constant awareness that loyalty had become a weapon as dangerous as any bolter or plasma cannon. The war forced humanity to confront the reality that sometimes the greatest threat comes not from alien enemies, but from within. As the conflict reached its zenith, both sides became locked in a cycle of escalation and vengeance. Minor victories were met with catastrophic counterattacks, ambushes led to devastating reprisals, and every strike created ripples of destruction that would take decades to recover from. Huron Blackheart's forces became increasingly adept at exploiting weaknesses in Loyalist strategy, while Loyalist commanders adapted with cold precision, using overwhelming firepower and disciplined tactics to contain the rebellion. The war became a grim chessboard where every move was calculated for maximum impact, yet every decision carried unimaginable human cost. Survival required ruthlessness, and Imperium realized that even victory could not erase the psychological and societal scars inflicted during the conflict. Ultimately, the Imperium managed to suppress the rebellion, though the victory was Pyrrhic. Chapters were purged, exiled, or reorganized, and Huron Blackheart himself was cast out, becoming a figure of legend and infamy. Planets lay in ruins, populations were decimated, and the Imperium's moral authority was forever tarnished. The lessons of the Badab War were clear. Even the mightiest offenders could turn into monsters when loyalty was fractured, and even the most righteous cause could produce unimaginable horrors when ambition, pride, and desperation intertwined. The war demonstrated that survival required not just strength but control, vigilance, and the ruthless suppression of dissent, a lesson the Imperium would carry for millennia. The Badab War's legacy continues to shape the Imperium's doctrine, governance, and military philosophy. It is a reminder that humanity's greatest warriors, if unchecked, can become its most dangerous enemies, and that loyalty is never absolute. Fortresses and fleets are now organized to prevent similar rebellions. Chapters are monitored for signs of dissent, and the Imperium maintains a vigilance born of past failures. Yet the memories of the conflict, though suppressed, endure among those who survived. They haunt training grounds, whisper through the halls of fortress monasteries, and linger in the minds of those who know the cost of ambition unchecked. The Badab War proved that even when survival is achieved, humanity pays in ways that are permanent, shaping culture, strategy, and the very essence of loyalty across the stars. Even centuries later, the echo of brother fighting brother resonates through the Imperium. Chapters are wary of autonomy. Commanders are trained to detect the earliest signs of dissent, and the memory of the astral claws serves as a warning to all who would challenge the established order. Humanity learned that sometimes the greatest battles are not against aliens or demons, but against themselves. The Badab War was a crucible of loyalty, ambition, and destruction, a conflict that tested the very foundation of the Imperium. Its lessons remain etched into the strategies, politics, and psyches of every space marine and citizen, a grim reminder that survival is never simple, that victory is never pure, and that horror can emerge from within, even among those sworn to protect humanity.